Neste foredragsholder, som Sanjana Arora. Hun forsker ved Senter for interkulturell kommunikasjon på VID, vitenskapelige høgskolen i Stavanger. Og Sanjana skal snakke på engelsk om eldre minoritetskvinner og helsetjenester, en fortelling om urettferdighet. Sanjana Arora.
Først og fremst, takk for at jeg blir invitert til å holde foredrag på denne viktige konferansen, og høre på så interessant og viktige samtaler. Jeg har lært mye i dag. Mine forskningsområder migrasjon, kjønn, alderdom og mangfold i ulike sammenhenger i samfunnet. Og i dag skal jeg snakke med dere om eldre minoritetskvinner og deres tilgang til helsetjenester. Og jeg vil da snakke til dere på engelsk, det som du forklarte. Det gjør jeg fordi jeg fortsatt lærer meg norsk, og jeg håper at jeg om ikke lenge kan holde foredrag på norsk. Og enda en gang, tusen takk for invitasjonen. Ja. So I'll start by presenting some facts that we already know. We can go. Are they? Yeah. So we know that older minorities they do not age the same way as non-minorities. We know that they are economically and socially disadvantaged. And we also know that people with an ethnic minority or migrant background use healthcare services less than the majority population, and that they experience barriers in encounters with healthcare professionals. A lot of these disadvantages or barriers, they get presented as statistics. But all minorities have a backstory. These are personal stories, but they also represent the political. They tell us about the barriers they experience, and I want to unpack some of these barriers today. In fact, I want to talk about a specific type of injustice that these stories of older minority women tell us about. So a little about the research that I conducted. It involved interviews and focus group discussions with older Pakistani minority women and their family caregivers, so their children, daughters, and daughter-in-laws. And I want to start by showing you all a quote from one of the participants, so one of the older minority women. And she says, I don't know why they have this thing in their mind for the women, foreigners, Asian women like us. We come here and they think that these women do drama based on what I've seen. Because whenever I would go, the GP, the fast lege, would talk in circles around me. What she meant was, ki wo mujhe behlati hai in Urdu. And she does not address the issue that I'm talking about. And then I want to show another quote by a caregiver, a family caregiver, and she says, there are many Pakistanis, so doctors have this perception that this is how things are in their culture. So it is possible that when my mother-in-law is telling about her problems, they may not take her very seriously. Because they say that people from foreign countries, they exaggerate their problems, and they visit doctors for minor issues. Many of us are perhaps familiar with these kind of examples. Ethnic pain, cultural pain, as some call it. I want us all to think about these quotes and ask ourselves, how do we understand this form of exclusion from being able to use healthcare services? How do we understand this injustice? And do we understand this as injustice in the first place? We in the both research community and practice community, we talk about injustices, urettferdighet. And these quotes, they are an example of a specific type of injustice, and it has a name. In 2007, Miranda Fricker, a feminist philosopher, she coined the term epistemic injustice. An epistemic injustice is when someone is given less credibility or that they are not given any credibility when they speak, that they are not believed or that they are ignored, dismissed, even if they are the ones who have knowledge about their own pain, their own experiences with the illness, and their body and mind. In short, they are perceived as not credible, not believable by their healthcare providers. The thing with epistemic injustice, as with all other forms of injustices, is that it may not happen to everyone in the same way, or it may not happen the same number of times in the same frequency as it happens with some other people. So some people are more at risk of it. People who are more likely to experience this are those that belong to certain age, certain ethnicities, certain identities, and those who belong to certain genders. These are also stigmatized identities. That means there exist prejudice and stereotypes about them. Through my research, I found that older minority women often experienced a kind of insecurity in meeting healthcare professionals. They felt that this was due to a larger discourse, a larger narrative about minorities abusing welfare services, and that they take more sick leave than they actually need. These discourses about minorities, these narratives about minorities, had this power to deny or take away the credibility from speakers of minority backgrounds in their meetings with healthcare professionals. But it was not just about being a minority, but also something to do about being an older woman. There are beliefs and stereotypes associated with what it means to be old. Some of these stereotypes can be positive. So, for example, old age can be associated with having more wisdom. But it can also be associated with someone who is more fragile or someone who is incompetent. And this intersection of being a minority and being old and being a minority woman influences whether they are believed and taken seriously in healthcare encounters. Because you have the power of all these stigmatized notions, stigmatized ideas, discourses in society about them, about what it means to be old, about what it means to be a minority woman, and they do not just stay there. They spill over, they move on to the context of healthcare. And they have an effect on how older minority women experience their interactions with healthcare professionals. Whether they are taken seriously or not, believed or not, and whether there occurs what Miranda Fricker calls as epistemic injustice. In such ways, healthcare institutions create and reproduce this form of epistemic injustice. In my research, as I said, I also conducted interviews with family caregivers, and I would like to show another quote by one of the caregivers. And she says, "My mother-in-law's doctor didn't provide very good care. She got an operation, so he never asked if she needed an interpreter, a taxi, or something like that. They would think this is their own problem. They didn't learn the language. They would criticize her. You've been here many years and you haven't learned anything. They would say this a lot in hospitals. Why didn't you learn?" Even though when the majority of the women I spoke with, the participants in this research, when they arrived in Norway, there were no formalized classes available to the same extent as they are today. This lifelong experience of being criticized for not having learned Norwegian was a general feeling, and it led to feelings of deservingness or undeservingness. And this led to many older women feeling that they cannot assert their rights, they cannot ask for their rights, because perhaps they do not belong here. And it was, in fact, their caregivers, the younger generation, who were more vocal, more outspoken about the challenges that their parents or parents-in-law experienced. So language and being a minority became problematic identities. It became a basis for grounds for unequal treatment. And when some older women did, in fact, talk about their experiences, their barriers, and the ways in which they were treated differently, they wondered whether this was because of language barriers, or was it because of my skin color, or is it because I'm a minority, I'm an immigrant, a woman. And some felt that there was a fine line between having a language barrier and being an immigrant. Whether it is due to language barriers or negative discourses about minorities, it made older minority women less credible in healthcare encounters. So this brings me to another issue, that whether we as society, the healthcare institutions, have the resources and skills to make sense of the experiences of older minority women. Because this is a kind of injustice, also known as hermeneutical injustice, but the term does not really matter here, but what matters is that whether we can understand that this is indeed a kind of injustice. Because these are subtle, these are like micro injustices. It's very hard to pinpoint. It is not that their ethnicity is being commented upon, or that the fact that they're a minority. There can be inequity or unequal access to healthcare, even if ethnicity or minority status may not be commented upon by healthcare professionals. But that they rather comment on the ways in which older minority women experience their pain, or that they do drama, or that they did not learn the language, that they are criticized, or that they take more sick leaves. Perhaps because it is much easier to comment on those things, or call them as strange behaviors. And a lot of it gets brought together under the category of cultural barriers, or the different ways in which people express pain. And we talk about cultural competency in healthcare and so on, without addressing the issue of power imbalances. And there is power in being able to take away the credibility from older minority women, and the power to rather focus on the cultural otherness of older minority women. The power to problematize some cultures, some identities, and a combination of it all, being an older minority woman. So we do need more awareness about this power and the bias, and this seemingly minor but serious injustices. I would like to now end this talk soon by saying a quote from Sara Ahmed, who is a feminist philosopher, which I think many of us will be able to relate, especially those who feel like they're problematic identities. And she says, when you expose a problem, you pose a problem. It might then be assumed that the problem would go away if you would just stop talking about it, or if you went away. I am going to stop talking about it now, but the problem is still not going to go away. And we will hopefully continue talking about it, not only in this conference, but beyond. And that we continue to ask ourselves if we really have access to healthcare services, or equal access to healthcare services, if some of us experience epistemic injustice while using those services. Tusen takk. Ja.